So I'm currently outside of my 72 unit apartment complex. This was a really good project that I'm pretty proud of completing. It took me 1 year to do it. I call this kind of a deal like a home run. Got it for a great price, and the previous owner, she was very easy to work with, very professional. It's now been about 2 years and took it over. It's in a great location. A lot of families here, schools around, safe. Definitely a very desirable location. It's almost always fully occupied. So I closed on it during the winter. Because I was renovating it, I personally don't think it's a problem closing in the winter. I would say you want to kind of time it in a way where once you're done the renovations, you do not want to be done and trying to lease the property out in the months of, for example, November, December, and January. I believe, based on my experience and talking to my property managers, those months are the slowest. So if you want to time your renovations, just make sure, you try to get people in there before those months, November, December, and January. But I closed on it in the winter. It took me a year to complete all 3 buildings, and I did not renovate every single unit. I basically went in and, during the due diligence process, I went in and analyzed all the units that needed renovations that were, in average condition, and then that were also completely renovated already. There was 25% of the units that were completely renovated. There was about 10% of the units, 10-15% of the units that were in, good average condition. And then the remaining units that were in a condition that were either old or that needed renovation. So based on that, I decided to renovate about 50 to 60% of the building. We did new windows on most of the units, new sliding doors, new patio doors. And then it was mainly like an interior upgrade, cosmetic, not a full ripping out walls and all that stuff, just more of a cosmetic uplift. It took about 1 year in total. So basically we did one building at a time. I asked the seller to have half the units in one building empty. She didn't have the property fully occupied, so this was easy. She just asked some of the tenants that were scattered around each 3 of the buildings to move in all in one. So filled up 2 of the buildings. So basically we had one building half vacant, and then we went in there and renovated half the units in that building. I guess, looking back at it, you just really need to be organized, because if you don't think about this stuff, and if you don't plan, because I was doing all this before closing. This is one of the key ways that I was able to do this project so quickly, because I was planning at the beginning before I closed on the building, right? So that's one of those things that I did at the beginning. So on closing, I had half of the first building vacant, right? So I went in, did the renovations, all that stuff. And then I guess the other point was I hired a really good contractor. This is what, as an operator, as the owner, you're going to have to, or you can hire somebody to vet contractors, but I did this myself. And because this was in a different province than I live in, I had to fly in to the city and spend some time here, probably a week, to vet different contractors. At the same time, I think I already had a really good management company. And when it comes to management companies, you do the same process as contractors, you vet them. I always recommend, going through at least, my rule of thumb is about 6 to 8 companies. If you feel you're not getting really good leads, or, the interviews aren't going well, do more, right? And then when you go through those interviews, you pick the top 3 and then go with the first option you like, but still have those 2 in the, on the side, right? And just in case, because in my situation, when I first entered this city, I had 3, and the one that I thought was the best turned out not to be the greatest, and they cost me a lot of money. So I swapped them out with my second option, which it seemed like she was a smaller company because she dealt with a little bit more of smaller buildings, but she was very transparent, honest, and straightforward. And I seem to have a better relationship with her company compared to the first one. And I've been with her ever since. But again, you don't always rely on just one management company. And I'm saying this based on, having a substantial portfolio. If you only have like a handful of properties, handful of units, it's not gonna be a huge deal, right? But if you get up to 50, 100 units, I recommend always having another option just in case, the management company starts to kind of get a little bit lazy, the bills start to increase, the communication starts to lack, because they need to understand that you can easily take your business somewhere else. You don't want to be in a position where they have all your portfolio and you don't even have a backup option, and then you're now in the situation where you're almost dependent on them, right? So you really want to be careful about that when it comes to property management companies. So back to contractors. So yeah, it's basically the same process, vet them, and I vetted a bunch, came down to 2 of them, but the one was a lot cheaper, to be honest, and this other one he wasn't like crazy expensive, but he definitely was expensive. But because this was such a big project, it was my first project, I think you need to kind of assess it yourself where you are at. But for me, I wanted a little bit more peace of mind, where I chose a little bit more expensive option because I knew there would be more professionalism, and there was. He was professional every step of the way. It was a little bit more expensive, a lot more expensive, but we got the job done and obviously made substantial amount of profits. But that's the route I went with. Where I'm at today, I might opt in for a little bit more reasonable pricing, just because I know what to look for now. I have more experience, and I would have contingencies in place just in case the contractor didn't meet those deadlines. Because for me, my past experience is deadlines and the contractor's agreement. I always recommend to have an agreement so everything's kind of in writing. Make sure there's deadlines. There can be deposits, and I don't ever recommend paying 50% up front. I recommend having like milestone payments. This just ensures that things actually get done and on time, and you're not in a situation where you gave the contractor 50% of the funds or the money, and they basically are taking their time and don't really care about the deadlines. You don't want to be in a situation like that. But I was very grateful that the contractor I chose did a great job and we were able to meet the deadlines. I was pretty optimistic about that year time frame. I don't know, but I would probably assume that if I went with the cheaper option, there might have been delays on that, but I wouldn't know if not actually going through it. But with this contractor, he definitely had everybody ready to go, which was great. And he actually did, because I enjoyed working with him so much, he did the next project as well. That was one of the main reasons I was able to complete this project within that year. So getting back to the story, closed, contractor came in with his crew, renovated the first building. Once that building was renovated, we asked the tenants on the next building if they would want to move to the new units. Most of them did. So then we got the second building half vacant, and then we repeated the process until we completed the whole project. I would say some of the delays and some of the issues I would share in this process would be because I had purchase plus improvements for my financing, because it was about $1 million project just in terms of like what we've actually put into the building in terms of renovations. It was a process to get that money back, because basically how it worked was I had to fund the renovations, submit all receipts and proof. And I think what I would do differently this time is I definitely wouldn't have it contingent on the unit being leased out. I don't think that should matter. I think if we can prove that the building has been completed in terms of renovations, I don't know. Yeah, because I know some lenders don't care about that. They just want receipts that you did the work, because it does take time to rent it out. Once it's completed, then we start leasing it out, right? But that does take time. It could take 2 to 3 weeks, right? So I don't think it's really necessary, or to be honest, that fair if we're waiting additional 3 weeks, right? Because what that does is just hold up the next project, because it's either I have to have like basically 2 buildings up in advance, or I have the amount of money to renovate 1 building and then I show receipts. As soon as I show receipts, we should get funded, reimbursed, and then I can start the next building. But what happened, which wasn't huge delays, but it was delays, that they wanted the building leased, the fully leased, right? Because most of the tenants moved over. So I couldn't imagine if we had to like get all new tenants, because that would have took even longer. But because most of the tenants moved over, we were able to kind of quickly expedite that process, but we'd still have to lease a few units, right? So that did take a couple weeks, right? Rather than us getting reimbursed right away, then we could have started the project right away. So there was a couple delays on that I think happened once. The final building, there wasn't really any issues. And then, yeah, when it came to refinancing the whole building again, it was great. Pretty smooth. The evaluation came in almost exactly what we projected, which was amazing. I think it's also because the market was in a pretty good position at that point, and it was in a good position, but also I remember, I think it was like 2-3 months later, then the market started to go really south. In a way where interest rates started to climb very quickly. In that situation, you just want to be careful, because you don't want to have bridge financing or private money where the environment becomes really unstable. And I know for that second project, our financing was open, right? So the interest rates kind of consistently changed over months, like based on month per month. Some months were okay, but some months we had a huge increase, right? And I know closer to the end of the project, it became a huge issue because the interest rates were really high. And there was delays with CMHC, the lender, and I was very concerned on how long we could really hold this project, in a sense, because I don't think in months, I think in worst case scenario, there's something happens, CMHC doesn't like the deal or the lender doesn't like the deal, they back out, and then we need to go through traditional financing in this high interest rate environment. So what is the worst case scenario here? I found always thinking like this, I recommend you got to think like this in more of a business sense. You don't want to think like this and get, overwhelmed all the time. You get like can't sleep, you can't operate. I don't let this affect my day-to-day or my personal life. It's just business, right? So at the end of the day, this is the worst case scenario, and what are some of the things I can do to control the situation? Because that's what you want to focus on. You do not want to focus on doom and gloom and like feeling bad for yourself, and I think that's kind of pointless. Like there's nothing you can do about stuff like that. Like you're in this situation, figure out a worst case scenario. Usually it never gets to the worst case scenario. That's the good thing, but figure out the worst case scenario and figure out what you can do to control the situation in that event, in that situation. So that's what I did. It didn't get to the worst case scenario. We eventually got approved. We eventually refinanced out and everything went fine, right? But it's still good to kind of have that in place just so you're ready and prepared.